Malcontent News is a team of journalists, activists, and researchers with three key missions. A commitment to show an unfiltered view of the before, during, and after of key events, live, as it happens. To defend the First Amendment using our rights of a free press. And to amplify the voices of underrepresented individuals including Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Our team is committed to seeking equality for all and holding those in power accountable. The easiest way to support Malcontent News is to bookmark our website at malcontentnews.com, like and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, and in the Google News app. To provide financial support, you can become a patron, make a one-time donation through Venmo, or link your Twitch account to your Amazon Prime account and use your free subscription to subscribe to Malcontent News. Thank you for supporting independent journalism and for being a malcontent. Good evening, Malcontents. My name is David, and I am the Malcontent. I hope you enjoyed that ride through the ST5 tunnel that will build to Kirkland. That will be completed sometime in 2068 at the cost of $96 billion. Today is Wednesday, April 7th. This is our inaugural Wednesday show as we're now moving to 3 days a week. And let me pull in my amazing co-host, Jennifer Smith. Jennifer, how are you doing this evening?
I am good, David. How are you?
I am doing good. Any day that I have a spiffy new shirt on and sporting a haircut is a good day.
Yes, it's a good day. And we got this kind of flower vibe thing going on that I think is pretty special. And it was totally unplanned.
It was totally unplanned, yes.
Yes.
So, Jennifer, when we had our show on Monday, we had talked about Arkansas. Asa Hutchinson had vetoed this anti-trans bill. And I had predicted that the veto would get overturned. It only took the Arkansas legislature 25 hours. And that law is now law in the state of Arkansas.
So let's call it what it really was. First of all, it was a performative veto because he knew that he had a veto-proof majority. He could say it, not alienate people, make people think he had a little bit of a backbone, knowing full well that they would have the veto-proof majority and enact the bill anyway.
And we've learned tonight that there is a bill progressing in North Carolina that is even more onerous. It is essentially identical to the one in Arkansas with two different provisions. One, instead of the cutoff being 18, it is 21 years old. And if a child up to 21 years old were to, say, go to a health professional or a teacher or a school counselor and expressed that they had transgender ideation or thoughts, there would be a requirement to notify the parents.
That's so disgusting, for one thing. And, just goes back to this. For some reason, Republicans, particularly white men, have a real issue with bodily autonomy. And they want to be able to control the way in which gender is constructed in society. They want to control women's reproductive rights. They want to make it so difficult to deviate from their preferred gender and social norms that they're now going to make it illegal to do so.
Completely agree, and we will monitor what will happen in North Carolina. My suspicion is it will pass. I don't know the makeup of the House and Senate in North Carolina and if there is the possibility of a veto-proof majority there. Also don't exactly know where the head of the North Carolina governor is. North Carolina is more of a purple state compared to Arkansas.
Yeah, that's why this, I think, is particularly alarming.
Yeah, so we'll just see where that goes. The other thing is we're still waiting to hear about the union vote down in Bessemer, Alabama. What I've heard on that, Jennifer, is there is a process right now going on. What a surprise, where both sides are questioning ballots, whether people were eligible to vote or not, if people who voted were qualified to vote in the first place, and they're sorting through all of that. And that's why the vote count is taking so long.
I'm just going to say it again. I'm going to get a big sign and put it behind me with some like giant Karl Marx quote from the Communist Manifesto, or something to the effect of neon lights that say seize the means of production, because this is absolutely like, again, it just goes back to capitalism, worker exploitation. You have, predicted that they will pass it, by a narrow margin and then shut that particular center down. And I wholeheartedly agree with you.
We'll see what happens. We'll continue to monitor that story. And the last thing is, I was out and about today. I actually did some retail action with the mask for the first time in more than a year. And Jennifer, it's flipping cold outside today. Where the hell is spring?
I don't know. And I feel a little bit betrayed because when I see sunshine, I expect warmth. I'm like ready for like crop top and tank top weather. And I go outside and it's freezing cold. And the only place I can safely wear a crop top is indoors. I call bullshit.
Yeah. I went sans coat and I was regretting my life choices.
Yeah.
We will continue to see temperatures at night in the 30s, almost as far out as I can see. So, but at least it's not pouring down rain. And at least it's not as bad as 2017, where winter just kind of hung on until June.
This is true.
Are we ready for the land acknowledgement?
Yes, let's do it. Malcontent News comes to you from Seattle, Washington, the occupied homelands of Coast Salish peoples. We're grateful to live and work as guests on these lands, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. This land acknowledgement is but one small gesture in the ongoing process of working toward repairing and sustaining relations with Coast Salish lands, waters, peoples, and their other than human kin.
Jennifer, thank you so much for doing that. You really, it cranks up the volume, so to speak, that we've added that to the show. This is the part of the show where I want to tell everybody, please spam those hearts. Mess with the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter. If you're watching us on Twitch or you're watching us on YouTube, you could just do a big long line of hearts or write love you mods or love you Jen or love you Malcontent, just not in a creepy way. And that actually messes with the algorithm and gets more eyeballs. The other thing is, if you're watching us on Facebook, do a share. Let other people know about the great content because we have an amazing show and in-house content for you tonight. If you're watching on Twitter, you could just simply do a retweet. If you're watching us on YouTube or Twitch, this is the point where you go, hey, there's great content. You really should check this out and you should follow and subscribe because then you can feed your head holes. And with that, we're going to jump into it with our first story. Jennifer, we're interviewing some mayoral candidates.
Yes, we are. We've done 2, in fact, so far, and hopefully many more to come.
Yes, absolutely. I want to explain to malcontents what we're doing, the format that we're following, and how we are committed to doing this in a fair way. The editorial board, working with Jen and myself, came up with a series of questions. Every candidate that will come onto our show prior to the primary will be asked the same block of questions. They will also be asked a couple of other questions in addition to that. The block of questions that all of the candidates are getting, they are getting those in advance in the interest of fairness. Because after we air the first interview, it tips the hands for all of the other candidates. And so that is why we are doing that. The first rounds of interviews that we are be doing are platform only. So we are not diving into, not yet, well, wait a minute, you said this, but the numbers show that. Or you promised this, but how are you actually going to make that happen? Or your opponent said this in response to this, what is your response back? That will come into the second round of interviews. And we've level set that with the candidates that we've talked to at this point. Jennifer has conducted our first two interviews. We are doing our first one tonight. Jennifer, I'm going to hand it over to you. This first half of the show is all you.
Yeah, so we got the opportunity. I reached out to Andrew Grant Houston's campaign and asked them if they would like to do an interview with us. They readily agreed. We had about a 40-minute conversation. You guys are going to see a chunk of that tonight. Like David said, they were given the questions in advance, and towards the end, I threw in a couple of additional ones. It is a really good conversation, and I hope you guys get some useful information out of it and learn a little bit about Andrew and what his vision for Seattle is should he be elected mayor.
Hello, Malcontents. This is Jennifer, and I am here today with Seattle mayoral candidate Andrew Grant Houston. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself, Jennifer?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for being here with us today and, coming to share your vision with our viewers. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciate being offered this platform, and I really appreciate the work that y'all have done throughout the past year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to run for Seattle mayor?
I am a queer, Black, and Hispanic architect. Originally from Texas, moved to Seattle at the end of 2016 to come and design housing to get my license as an architect. And what I really realized is that over time, the progressive and more sustainable city that we always say that we are isn't quite true once you kind of get into the weeds. And so after having a lot of frustration trying to support and organize around land use reform, climate issues, after the last round of wildfires and seeing the city response, which just did not feel appropriate, especially given that we have been in a housing emergency and a homelessness crisis since 2015, I finally said, okay, this has got to stop. We have got to stop talking about the city that we say that we are and actually become that city. And so that's what I'm focused on.
It's that Seattle is facing an ongoing housing crisis related to unhomed peoples. Washington State experienced a 6.2% increase in homelessness during 2019 and 2020. King County spends over $1 billion per year in public and private investment in support of approximately 12,500 houseless people with disappointing results. If you were elected mayor of Seattle, how would you address this crisis? And how do you think your plan would provide aid in resolving the crisis, both in short and the long term?
Well, I'm really glad that you asked the question specifically looking at a short-term solution and a long-term solution, because that long-term solution is driving down the cost of housing, which is really tied to allowing for more housing to happen across the entire city, and not just in Black and brown neighborhoods like we currently have with the urban village strategy, but in allowing for more duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and even larger permanent supportive housing to happen in every single neighborhood in Seattle. And so that is how we really focus on that long-term solution. But I know firsthand as an architect that even if we were to cut every single piece of red tape tomorrow, that it would still take about 3 years to build all of that housing. And so what that short-term solution really needs to be is tiny homes. If we allow for tiny homes, I know I'm proposing 2,500 tiny homes, that is our short-term solution, how we truly address the crisis as the crisis that it is, because we currently have 5,500 unsheltered people still in King County. And so that is really how we stem the bleeding. But at the end of the day, something I really want to point out is just that we had some recent numbers come out from the last point in time count. So that's where they go in one night and look over everything and see who is unsheltered and who is currently unhoused. It seems like the numbers in King County specifically are fairly stable. And so what that means to me is that as much as we are being successful in taking people out of being unhoused and houselessness, that people are falling in at the same rate. And so we really need to focus on those preventative measures in order to ensure that less people fall into houselessness. And in that way, we're actually going to start to see some change.
I mean, it's actually gotten worse as a result of the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
So as a result of the ongoing COVID pandemic, economic recovery and development, as well as addressing Seattle's crumbling transit infrastructure, such as the West Seattle Bridge, is of great importance. Moreover, some are expressing concern about the large corporations and many in the workforce leaving Seattle. The question then is threefold. How do you plan on tackling the infrastructure issue, aiding in economic recovery and development as we actually start to move beyond COVID? And what concerns do you have about the loss of corporations and workers in the city?
What I really have seen is not necessarily that we're losing corporations. It's more that people are recognizing that during the pandemic, they're not able to enjoy the things that really make them want to live in a city in the first place. And so if you look at some of the numbers, especially some of the movement happening in some of the other high cost cities like Los Angeles and New York and San Francisco, there are actually people from those more expensive cities, particularly San Francisco, that are moving here. And so we have actually seen a slight increase in our population during this time, even though it doesn't quite make sense, like in our minds, like it does not quite compute, but it's because they are having similar issues where they're saying, look, San Francisco is just way too expensive. We need to go somewhere less expensive, and that's here. What we are seeing is that people from Seattle are actually moving to the suburbs in the area, moving to Kent and Renton and Auburn. And one of the reasons for that is because they're looking to purchase homes. And so in that way, like I said before, we really need land use reform so that we can allow for more people to purchase condos or townhomes or row houses. So in that way, they start to enter home ownership because that's the thing that many people want to do. And as much as we know about the history of the United States, that is how you build generational wealth for yourself and for your family. And so in that way, hopefully we can bring people back to the city once we start to open up. My solution for a long-term strategy is really related to building more housing. And so in that way, investing more funds into not just housing, but also streets, improving sidewalks, and actually building sidewalks where we currently don't have sidewalks. And all of those things that we have to do, all of those construction-related jobs are great living wage union jobs. And so in that way, we are taking people from our communities and telling them you can be a part of the positive change within your own community and build wealth that way as well.
Well, one of the things too that happens is when people start to migrate to these places like Kenton, Auburn, and Renton, is it drives up the rent, it drives up the price of housing, and it exacerbates the homeless crisis. So it makes 100%. It makes it really difficult for people who were living in those areas because it was reasonable to continue to do so.
And in that way, that's kind of why Seattle, as much as we are dealing with a regional homelessness crisis, that a lot of that crisis came from us, because what ends up happening is that people move to those cities and they don't have the same kind of protections that they have here as renters in Seattle. And so in that way, we do need a regional response. But a lot of the origin of our current crisis in the region is directly tied to the exclusionary policies that we have had here in Seattle for decades.
Police violence and ongoing racial inequality, Seattle has earned a national reputation as a crime-ridden, dirty, and unsafe space. At one point, the city was labeled by the previous presidential administration as an anarchist jurisdiction. Do you agree with this view? What will you do to shift perceptions? And do you feel racial inequality exists within Seattle? And how do you plan to address it?
So I would say that we're not necessarily an anarchist jurisdiction as much as we are an anti-fascist jurisdiction. And I really say that with a lot of heart, because I am a huge Seattle Sounders supporter. And I just remember whenever we were having a lot of the protests, especially within June and July of last year, and the president was complaining about Antifa, and you would see Sounder supporters and the Emerald City supporters come out and say, like, no, yeah, we are Antifa. Like, the 3 arrows down, like, we are going to be a part of this and support, and really recognize that a lot of this police brutality is, in essence, state-sponsored violence. We need to provide methods of public safety that ensure people who look like myself are actually able to go out in public and feel safe themselves. In that way, really thinking about how we redefine public safety, how we address our current methods of policing and say, this currently is not working. And I recognize, as someone who is not just an architect, but an urban designer, that part of the safety is actually redesigning how our streets work and function. And so that is why I'm making not just policing, but also transforming our pedestrian infrastructure, transforming our bike infrastructure, because there are a lot of deaths currently happening on our streets that are completely preventable. And in that way, we're really focusing on a true vision zero, that anyone can be outside in public space and feel safe at any time, day or night.
Compared to the West Coast cities of Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, Oakland, and San Diego, Seattle has the second highest cost per police officer, tied with Oakland, and the second highest officer per capita behind San Francisco. Additionally, the average officer makes $153,000 per year before benefits, according to the Seattle Times. Despite this large force and supporting budget, Seattle police report slow response times and claim the issue is the lack of staffing. The budget was cut approximately 18%, and staffing levels were adjusted to support roughly 1,325 officers. How would you define defund the police, and what is your position? How do you restore community trust in SPD?
What you're really talking about are two things. You're talking about reforming and then also defunding. Yes. And so, in essence, these two decisions that people are kind of going between, when I say it's more of a yes and. I pride myself on wanting to become a mayor that is the yes and mayor. That we both need to reform our current police department so that we can restore trust, but also during that process, we have to start redefining what public safety means, and that means 100% public safety, but less than 50% of that is the police. The number that really draws my attention, that comes from the work that has been done for many, many years here in Seattle, since the start of the consent decree, are from groups like Decriminalize Seattle, as well as the No New Youth Jail movement. So in that way, coupled with the King County Equity Now coalition, of which I am a member as part of Share the Cities, looking at the nearly 70% increase since 2010 in terms of the budget. I don't know about you, but if I look at numbers and response times, I don't feel like there's been a 70% increase in the effectiveness of the Seattle Police Department. And so in that way, we really need to focus on more of a model that looks at preventative care, that looks at harm reduction, that looks at really addressing the issues that a lot of people are facing before they enter into an event of crisis. Because it's not just about not responding to a crisis with healthcare or someone or mental assistance, someone that is not a person with a gun. It's also about addressing the instability that has created these crises. So in that way, that is why housing is such a big part of my platform, is that if we reduce our number of unhoused individuals, we reduce the number of times that those people are facing the police or engaging with the police. If we reduce the number of people who are just getting by, just struggling to survive, that commit crimes of poverty, then again, we reduce the reliance on our current policing systems. And so in that way, it makes a clear message that we are working in ways that are truly creating public safety that have nothing to do with police. And so it makes it that much more possible to be able to do the defund work, which has been asked for by community for many, many years. What I'm really saying to people, especially as the only mayoral candidate who has committed to continue the work of defunding the police, is I am listening to the community, especially those who are most impacted, people who look like me, fear for their lives every single day they go outside that we are going to address this issue head on. We are not going to walk back any promise. I am committed to defunding the police and establishing a new method of public safety.
And that's the first half of the interview. Jennifer, what are your thoughts?
I was kind of reading the comments, and Kimberly was like, "Can we have him and Colleen Echo Hawk?" Well, I have some good news for you, Kimberly. We actually interviewed Colleen Echo Hawk, and you should be seeing that soon. But I think he has a lot of energy. He's a charismatic guy, seems very passionate about his vision for Seattle. And I thought, we had a really engaging conversation. And so I'm really glad that he's getting to some exposure and sharing his platform with our viewers, because I think he has a lot of really interesting things to say.
One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to make the full transcript of this interview available. That'll be on our website tomorrow. We're going to do that for all of the candidates that extend our offer to do an interview. So people will be able to reference back to this as they move through the primaries and go ahead and make their choices. We're going to take a little pause for the cause. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go on to part number 2. Hi, Malcontents. I'm David, the Malcontent, and I'd like to talk to you for a moment about supporting independent media. When you support us, you help us bring the before, during, and after. You help us defend the First Amendment. You help us amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices, and you help us hold leaderships at a local, state, and federal level accountable. None of this would be possible without support by viewers just like you. When you become a patron for as little as $5 a month, you help buy technology, safety equipment, and help cover travel expenses so that we can continue to bring you news that you trust. If you can't become a patron, you can do a one-time donation on Venmo, and your dollars will go to the exact same causes. With your continued support, we can continue to amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices while showing the truth on what is happening in the world around us. Once again, thank you. And one of the things I'd like to point out, if you are enjoying this interview tonight, if you're finding this informative, you're finding this helpful, this wouldn't be possible without our patrons and without the people that support us through Venmo. This would not have happened. And so, mad love to the people that support us. We love you, we like you, and for as little as $5 a month, you can become a patron also. And there's a new patron perk that will be starting next week for people at all levels. If you are a patron at any level, as little as $5 a month, you'll get access to the show notes. So we will put our research and show notes up there for our patrons at any level. That's a new perk, and we'll be starting that up next week. Like to remind you again, please spam those hearts. Do a like and a share, especially a share or a retweet if you're watching us on Twitter. Let the world know about Malcontent News and the great coverage that we provide. Independent journalism is not possible without our audience and support from people just like you. Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to you as we get ready to move to the second half of our interview with Andrew Grant Houston.
Yeah, so, the first part we talked about the homeless crisis and, kind of ended on defunding the police. And he talks a little bit more in detail. We talk about some alternatives to police on emergency calls. And then I kind of throw a curveball question to him at the end. So why don't we go ahead and roll the rest of that interview?
All right. And with that, we will go ahead and roll that clip.
So one of the many things that COVID has shed light on is the ongoing mental health crisis in the country. Seattle's not exempt from this, and recently a man in the throes of a mental health crisis was fatally wounded by SPD near the Seattle waterfront. Would you consider implementing something similar to the STAR program in Colorado, which replaces traditional law enforcement responders with a medic and mental health professional for some emergency calls as a way to de-escalate situations where there is a clear mental health component?
Yes, 100%. And I feel like that model in particular is an excellent example of how we can provide public safety and maintain our public safety levels while also shifting resources from the police department into our new emergency center that has been established by the Seattle City Council. And so just in that way, we are providing different types of public safety, different types of care that can address crises when they happen. Because at the end of the day, as someone who watched that video, someone was in crisis and was really, truly suicidal. But if you're not addressing those issues head on and directly engaging with that person, even though he did have a weapon, then we are never going to get to a point where we will truly address a lot of the trauma that we know is coming from COVID, like you were talking about specifically. Yeah. I know even for myself, there have been many days, especially as a high-risk individual, someone who just got my first dose of vaccine, so really excited, but I have spent as long as 6 weeks indoors without going outside even once. Clearly, that is going to have a mental impact on myself that I don't even fully recognize, but I know for myself, and I have the privilege to have healthcare, to have mental health services so that I can go and get help. And so in many ways, when we talk about true public safety, we need to be investing in mental health services for those who cannot afford it currently. And in that way, we can avoid issues and incidents like the one that occurred on the waterfront.
I know this is another thing that's in your platform and land use. So
yes.
50% of Seattle's land that is zoned for housing is zoned for single family. Over the last 5 years, most of the new construction has been centered in the 12% that supports high density housing. Developers and builders focused on small footprint properties with minimal parking and luxury appointments. Housing affordability is a major problem for Seattle. Do you support changing zoning rules for ADUs and more dense construction to alleviate the housing crisis? And what changes would you support?
This is something very near and dear to my heart as someone who is a lifelong renter. Since I was born and raised by my mother, a single parent, but also something that I have direct professional experience on. Before I moved here to Seattle, I was a land use consultant. And so in that way, I was actually working with cities and aiding them in rewriting the rules that really define how their cities would develop. And so truly understanding the system that in many ways was established solely as a way to keep people of color out of neighborhoods and cities. Zoning in general has a very long history, but it does not have a history that has existed the entirety of the lifespan of even Seattle. Zoning that has become restrictive and restrictive land use codes in general in Seattle did not start until the 20s. And so what you see in a lot of neighborhoods that are currently zoned for only having one house per plot of land is that there are actually a lot of duplexes, triplexes, small apartment buildings that exist in these neighborhoods. And so what we are saying is that this current system is not only a continuation of the white supremacy of the past, because that's exactly what it is. We are saying that this is not sustainable environmentally, economically, or culturally. The thing that you really touched on is the urban village strategy, which focuses a lot of the density into areas which are effectively either industrial land, downtown, or communities of color and the neighborhood, which I know firsthand because I live on Capitol Hill. I cannot tell you how many bars I've ever heard of during the pandemic that have essentially shut their doors, not because they could not afford to continue paying their rent, but because their landlord said, sorry, your lease is up and we actually want to redevelop a piece of property. When we allow for development to occur across the entire city, we are not going to see the displacement And what I don't call myself gentrification, I call communicide, the cultural destruction of our Black and brown neighborhoods, of Capitol Hill, that when we spread out that development across the entire city, not only will people then get to choose where they want to live, because I know a lot of people who want to live in Wallingford, and I know a lot of people who want to live in Laurelhurst and in other places in the North End. There just is nowhere for them to be able to afford. We will also be able to have a more sustainable city for everyone else. So we will relieve the pressure that we currently have on our Black and brown community, especially the South End, so that they can also continue to enjoy their lives in the communities that they have developed there over time.
So moving on, Seattle has a reputation for having high taxes compared to other Washington cities. A number of initiatives have added incremental taxes to fund transit, homeless programs, education, and the general fund. These taxes are small on paper, 0.1%, for example, but most of these taxes are regressive due to Washington state's tax structure. Will you pledge no new taxes on the citizens of Seattle?
No, because we are going to shift to progressive taxes. We are going to establish an income tax, and I'm specifically establishing an income tax because legally we're allowed to, a flat tax of 1% that I am calling the just transition tax. And so in establishing this tax, I want it to fund specifically 4 things. One of them being apprenticeships. So we talked earlier about jobs and infrastructure and construction. In order to build the housing that we need, because we have a lot of housing to kind of backfill, we need to be able to train people to do that kind of work. And so I want to specifically dedicate some funds there. You talked about earlier, how are we going to support small businesses coming out of the pandemic? The second thing that I want to do is reduce our business and occupation tax so that they can be able to have that kind of recovery and sell. The third thing that I want to do is establish a new public development authority. And what that is really going to be focused on is that research and development, the thing that private dollars really can't do, in order to focus on net zero building. So in that way, all the new housing that we need does not additionally contribute to our carbon emissions, because we know we just simply need to reduce those significantly. And the last thing that I want to do is invest more money into our equitable development initiative, because that money is specifically going back to our Black and brown communities, our BIPOC communities, so that they can self-determine the types of housing, the types of communities that they are able to develop for themselves.
So you referenced creating an income tax. Could you talk more specifically about what you mean by that?
So there was a recent decision, and I want to say it was summer of last year, where the Washington Court of Appeals essentially said that Seattle itself actually has the right to tax income as property, because that's really what we're getting at when it comes to the Washington State Constitution, is that income is seen as property. And so in essence, this is being treated as like a flat property tax. And so they have given us the legal go-ahead to tax up to 1%. Now, I know that there definitely needs to be a way to make that flat tax more progressive. And so when I am in office, I definitely am focused on looking at how are we actually going to implement this? How are we potentially going to give credits to people who are below a certain income? But at the same token, what this really shows for myself, and I believe, is that when it comes to proposing policy, I'm not just spitting out words. I really am planning on doing the diligence, and my team is already doing that due diligence in order to ensure on day one, I'm able to start and act and improve the city for all Seattleites.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. I really appreciate it. Now I kind of have a selfish question because I am a historian. My primary field is American Indian and Indigenous history. Now I noticed on your website that you reference that you advocate for Indigenous sovereignty. And you know, we know Seattle is home to the Duwamish peoples who were federally recognized for a short period of time and then had that federal recognition revoked. But Seattle in itself has a very rich Indigenous history and contemporary presence that is often overlooked and ignored, or sometimes, you know, celebrated as a relic of the ancient past. So what do you mean when you say you advocate for Indigenous sovereignty?
What that really means is recognizing the past and present of Native Indigenous people in the Seattle and the larger Puget Sound region. one of the things that I really love about Seattle is not just our land acknowledgement, but also that in our Office of Intergovernmental Relations, that they specifically speak between the city and local tribes in the area. And so in that way, upping that engagement and really recognizing, one, that should happen and continue to happen, especially as we address a lot of these regional problems and crises, which, for example, the homelessness crisis disproportionately falls on our Native and Indigenous people, as well as really recognize that one of our biggest responsibilities, especially as a holder of land, is to be good stewards of that land and do that in concert with our local Indigenous people.
Thank you so much for answering that question. Like, I didn't have it on the list and I kind of threw it at you, but I saw it on your website when I was reading up and stuff again earlier, and I was like, I really want to ask this question.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, for me, when it comes to especially any group of color, whether it be Black, Indigenous, Asian American, that people are allowed the ability to self-determine. And that when it comes to a lot of the solutions that I want to provide them in a way that picks up those with the least first. And so that is why my campaign is even called the Rising Tide in the first place, is that the rising tide lifts all boats, but that it starts at the bottom and works its way up.
And I think that's such an important thing, because so much of settler colonization in the United States was justified through this: brown people can't self-govern, brown and Black people can't self-govern. And so self-determination is such a huge thing for people to recognize. Is there anything else that you would like our viewers to know?
Currently, I have a clear vision for what the city should look like in 2100. But I recognize that myself, as the potential incoming mayor, will have a significant role to play in the next 8 years, ideally in the next 2 terms, because ideally the next mayor is actually going to serve out 2 full terms and not decide to not run again. That policy and those policy points and those plans will be coming out beginning next week. So we are going to be releasing our full slate of names and then get into more details. And so I'm really excited to share that with people, because a lot of the work from that came directly from the community when they looked at the vision and we asked them, we recognize that we share this vision together, that we all want to see the city improve in a number of these ways, but we have to also agree on the steps to get there. And so in doing that work already and having those conversations, we don't have to repeat the Seattle process over again. We can say with certainty that I will be a mayor of action, and on day 1, start to implement the things that people are asking for.
Well, thank you so much for being here and speaking with us and sharing your vision. Look forward to seeing what you put out next week.
Absolutely.
Great job, Jennifer.
Thanks. He was a really easy flowing conversation. So yeah, I thought he had a lot, like I said, a lot of good energy. He got my last question that I threw at him kind of like at the last minute. He took the time to answer that, and I really appreciated that, because I think recognizing Indigenous sovereignty in Seattle, because we have a mix of recognized and unrecognized Native nations, it's exceptionally important. Plus, Seattle has this very long history of, really paying homage to Native peoples, but also treating them as though they're like a relic of the distant past. This whole kind of like salvage anthropology treatment, they don't really exist anymore. They were something that we had long ago. So we pay tribute to them, but don't recognize their contemporary presence. So that is something that's really important to me. So I felt that it was necessary to ask. And I thought he did a good job of answering that in the moment.
Yes, and we will have Colleen Echohawk on the show on Monday.
Yes. We were lucky enough to get for those of you who have been talking about Colleen Echohawk in the comments, we did an interview with her about the same length. She has similar questions. I have a couple additional questions for her, specifically about, because she is an Indigenous woman, and a couple of things she's been doing, like her Native women leadership town halls. So she'll talk a little bit about those too. But I also saw somewhere in the comments somebody was talking about, I hope we talk more about climate change. And if you actually go to his website, he has a significant plan for addressing climate change as well. And I know that, as he said towards the end of our interview, he was adding more stuff to his platform at the beginning of this week.
Yeah. And so what we'll do is we'll do a little pause for the cause, and we'll keep moving the show along. Our next story takes us to Kirkland via Seattle, via Phoenix, via Florida, via Houston, in a wide-ranging investigation that tonight has resulted in a guilty plea. The neo-Nazi organization Atomwaffen, formed right here in Washington State, was under investigation by the Fed's counterterrorism agency for over 2 years. And with that, I'm going to roll a clip and introduce you to the hate group, one of the groups that is considered one of the most dangerous hate groups in the United States of America, Atomwaffen. We've blurred some stuff out, just a little bit of a caveat. Some people may find some of the images disturbing and or offensive.
The only right they deserve is the right of lead. Hail Hitler.
A series of sinister online videos produced by the Atomwaffen division. The scenes include what the group calls hate camps, including firearms training. One recorded session occurred just outside the city of Concrete in Skagit County in an abandoned concrete plant called Devil's Tower. Why is Atomwaffen training and arming itself? Its members are followers of Adolf Hitler, but it is more telling that they also admire 1960s mass murderer Charles Manson. Manson's followers committed murders in hopes of sparking a race war between blacks and whites. Atomwaffen has that same battle cry. Race war now! Caleb Cole of Snohomish County is the leader of Atomwaffen's Washington cell, according to documents filed in King County Court.
So there's a little bit of background on Atomwaffen from 2019, Jennifer.
Yeah, that's alarming. A mix of Charles Manson and Hitler devotees.
Right here in Washington State. There's another report that was done by Nora O'Donnell that showed pictures of some of the people that we saw in those training videos and propaganda videos that they made in Poland at Auschwitz, holding up Nazi flags within the camp at Auschwitz, standing outside the main gate, giving thumbs up, and other locations they did. Those photos were confiscated by U.S. Customs when they arrived back in the United States.
I'm just going to say this again. We need to dismantle white supremacy. We need to do something about this demographic of young white men who feel so entitled that the way in which they express that, entitlement and disappointment is through hatred of people that do not look like them and, random acts of violence. I mean, this is just absolutely appalling. It is 2021. There is no place for this anymore, but the nation state is complicit in allowing for there to be space for this kind of activity.
Well, we know that one of their cohorts was essentially given a sentence of time served because the judge in that case felt essentially 21-year-old young man, whole life in front of him, grew up with a terrible childhood, and, well, he suffered enough.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm not making this up. So there are 4 of them arrested. We're going to get to that part of the story. One of them recently in federal court pleaded guilty, and in that case, the 21-year-old individual, the judge essentially sentenced them to time served and supervision, basically saying that they had an awful childhood, that I believe they identify LGBTQIA. I don't know how they identify, but they've had to hide that essentially they felt unaccepted by society. And so here came these neo-Nazis that embraced them, and he was like, cool. And it was just a silly mistake, and he has suffered enough.
That's such, again, back to systemic white supremacy, entitlement. White men feel entitled to particular things, and when they don't get it, this is how they respond.
Well, let's fast forward to February 26th, 2020.
Cameras are not allowed in federal court, and the only image we have of Cameron Brandon Shea is this courtroom sketch. It was around midnight Wednesday morning when Shea, on his way to work at the Kirkland Fred Meyer, was taken into custody by the FBI. Agents poring over his truck with search warrants looking for additional evidence in the case against him and 3 other defendants for distributing these. Threatening posters, many directed at journalists looking into the Adam Waffen group, which included our own Chris Ingalls, who received this letter in the mail at his home address. Members of the Anti-Defamation League also targeted, and the targets were both here and in Arizona and Florida. But at that first court appearance, one of our reporters did speak at length to a friend of Shea's who was with him as they both walked to work at the Fred Meyer that night, saying he likes animals, is a vegetarian, and she doesn't think he'd actually do anything bad. She says she's known him since they both went to Redmond High School and was unaware of anything tying him to a neo-Nazi group. And while he made racist and sexist comments, always thought he was joking.
You're not the same. I'm an American. You're a sick asshole.
He was just joking. Ha ha!
He likes-
Funny joke. I make funny joke.
He likes animals. He can't do anything bad now, right? Like, what in the actual, like, okay, I'm not going to swear tonight. I'm going to be on my best behavior. But it doesn't, like, tip you off at all that there's something awry or amiss with this person when they're consistently making racist and sexist jokes. And what does it say about you that you don't take them seriously and just cast them aside as jokes?
We shop at this Fred Meyer. And one of the things, Jennifer, I was wondering was, wait a minute, the FBI did an arrest in the parking lot at the Fred Meyer. My phone didn't blow up with David, you need to get down here with your camera. The FBI is in Kirkland. And on February 26th, I was flying back from Africa. So I wasn't here. And honestly, this whole arrest story and everything went pew for me. So I was very surprised when the news came out today that Cameron Shea pled guilty in federal court today. So the question now goes into what kind of sentence will they get? But let me give you a little bit of rundown on that, and then you can unpack it. Federal hate crime and conspiracy charges, U.S. District Court in the Western District of Washington. He pled guilty on both counts. He's the identified leader of the neo-Nazi group Adam Waffen, pleading guilty for threatening journalists and activists in multiple states, including, as you heard in that clip earlier, Chris Ingalls of King 5, who lives, I believe, in Edmonds. They specifically targeted Black and Jewish journalists. The case was investigated by the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force with assistance from National Security Division, Counterterrorism Section. Sentencing will be on June 28th. Faces up to 10 years on the hate crime charge, 5 years on the conspiracy charge for a potential maximum sentence of 15 years. No parole in the federal court system, so whatever they're sentenced will serve out almost all of that. But you know what's interesting me, Jennifer, is how quiet the political right is. You know, if this guy was, he has a beard, but if he wore maybe like, like a turban, and I know that turban is not Arab, but that's the ignorance that comes from that. Or if he expressed Muslim ideology, I think Tucker Carlson would be lighting this guy up tonight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here, I think you're frozen or I'm frozen. So here's my concern about him. Yes, it's good that he's arrested. He's pled guilty. He's facing these charges. But does he become a living kind of like, I don't want to call him a martyr, but somebody that is still idealized for his vision, and people who are within these groups or who embrace Nazi ideology, does he become a symbol for them and kind of encourage them to continue moving forward? Because we've seen that there has been little done in this country to quash this movement. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's been coddled. So it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to be a problem. And when was the Holocaust, David? What? Not 6-7 decades ago? 6-7 decades ago was the Holocaust?
About
and we're
7.
still we're still having to deal with the repercussions of that. And part of this fault of the United States, because if we look back to the Nuremberg trials, that was a show trial. Those people, most of them, the majority, didn't serve time. A lot of them were given high-ranking positions within the U.S. government because it was right at the beginning of the Cold War, and they wanted technology and scientists and people who could help them win that Cold War. So they basically let these people off, and they're continuing to let these people off today.
Well, at least we know from the pictures when they were there at Auschwitz on their tourism visit that at least they're not Holocaust deniers. We will continue to follow the story of the 4 co-conspirators with Cameron. One is fighting the charges, has pled not guilty, and is planning to go to trial. Everyone else has pled out and pled guilty in probably what are plea deals. One interesting thing we don't know in one little angle, I'll just plant this seed. For the one who essentially got the hall pass, something we don't know, are they working on a bigger case, and is that person turned state's evidence? Maybe that's something we'll find out in 6, 12, or 18 months. Local story, we'll continue to follow it. Jennifer, I just want to move on to our next piece, which I know is your story.
Well, let's do it. So there's been a lot happening in the past couple of days during the Chauvin trial. And a lot of this is centered around expert witnesses coming in and testifying to the excessive use of force. Today was interesting because they basically did a lot of, here, let's inform the jury of the way in which investigations work. We're going to go through and kind of step-by-step demonstrate what is done, what happens, and so they have a better understanding of the process. Where it gets particularly interesting, though, is the clip that we have, and then I want me and you, David, to kind of unpack this clip, because I have some...
His most aggressive cross-examination yet questioned an LAPD sergeant, an outside use of force expert who called Chauvin's actions excessive.
A reasonable officer could perceive the words that people are saying and the tone that it is being said in as a threat or a risk to the officer's safety. Agreed?
A risk, possibly, but officers are typically trained that when it comes to verbal threats.
Now, that LAPD sergeant said that Chauvin's 866 hours of training should have prepared him to deal with that crowd, which included a 9-year-old girl. But Shep, as you mentioned, the defense team has been arguing that Floyd's drug use and underlying health conditions led to his death. Today, the attorney for Floyd's family was having none of it.
Even I was surprised that he has the audacity to say, oh, it's the crowd's fault. These angry people, which I think is a suggested way of trying to say these angry black people. It's just asinine.
testimony continues tomorrow, Shep. We're expecting to hear from more medical experts.
Shepard Smith here.
There
All
was
right,
another.
I'll go first.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, the whole angry crowd thing just hurts my brain. And the reason it hurts my brain, as somebody who filled protests all summer, all winter, and at times was between both sides, where police are firing 40 millimeter less lethal and throwing flashbangs, and there's pepper spray and there's smoke bombs, and protesters are throwing fireworks back, and there's yelling and shouting and pushing on all sides. I was able to hold the camera steady and focus on the job that I had to do, because I'm a grown-ass adult who doesn't panic. And I think that the first order rule of a police officer is you don't panic in situations. So the hostile crowd thing, which was a crowd of children as young as 9 years old who watched a man get murdered, to me is just a load of horse hockey.
So the more problematic thing that happened today is there was a video clip played when George Floyd was still able to speak, before he went silent, before he stopped moving. And so the defense, Eric Nelson, who I found out today works for a very notable law firm in Minnesota that has been hired to defend the police. He plays a very short clip in court, and he asks the investigator testifying at the time, his last name is Ryerson. He asks him, "Do you hear Mr. Floyd say, 'I ate too many drugs'?" And the first person he asked this to before Ryerson, he asked another investigator prior to this, and he says, "I can't make out what he's saying." He pesters him again. He said, "Do you hear him? Let's play this again. Do you hear him say, 'I ate too many drugs'?" He says, "I cannot make out what he's saying." So he asks Ryerson. Ryerson has never seen this clip. He plays a very short clip without context. And he says to him, "Do you hear him say, 'I ate too many drugs'?" Ryerson initially says yes. They come back up to do redirect. They played the full clip in context. And he asks Ryerson a series of questions. He says, "Was this the first time that you've heard this clip?" "Yes." "So you've never had any like exposure to this clip where he says this particular statement prior to right now. So Mr. Nelson just kind of threw this at you and asked you what you heard." And he said, "Yes." So they played the full clip again in context. And so what happens is, and what Ryerson hears is Floyd say, "I did no drugs." So what's happening with the whole angry black crowd, and this focus on Floyd's past drug use, is that Nelson is taking two of the most common stereotypes of Black people, that they're angry, they're dangerous, they're drug addicts, and trying to use it to get the murder convictions dropped and allow his white client who murdered this Black man on the streets of Minnesota to walk free. And that is where we're at in America right now.
Holy shit! Where's the Tylenol?
It's like doing a push-pull when you ask a question like that, because the whole idea behind a question like that is to create seeds of doubt within the minds of the jurors. And as we continue to say over and over again, as we continue to do our in-house coverage, and if people are wondering why we're not covering this on the daily, there are so many other sources that are covering this on the daily. And if we were covering this, we wouldn't be able to do things like the Andrew Grant Houston interview, the Colleen Echo Hockey interview. We have Elise Barrett coming on tomorrow to talk about COVID. We wouldn't be able to do those other things. And so there's a ton of channels that are covering on the daily. That's why we're doing a summary on it. Jennifer, you're doing a great job on the summaries on this, and we will continue to follow this. It just takes one juror. It just takes one.
One more thing I want to say real quick. On ABC News, Deborah Ramirez, she's a law professor at UMN, University of New Mexico, UNM. She had some really great kind of rebuttals to the people that were complaining about, that Floyd deserved what happened. And she was like, this big settlement, this $27 million settlement the Floyd family received, this is paid for by taxpayers. Derek Chauvin does not pay a dime of this. And she suggested that they do like what they've been, kind of implemented in Colorado, where, police have to have some kind of liability insurance. If they have something like this happen, like kind of like doctors have malpractice insurance. If something like this happens, they have to pay a percentage of, the whatever damages are paid out to whoever's been wronged, as a way in which to kind of hold police accountable, because police unions have become so powerful, it is difficult to really hold police accountable for anything. So check her out. She's an analyst on ABC News, where I was watching today. Her name is Deborah Ramirez. She is a law professor at the University of New Mexico, has some really great thoughts about ways to hold police accountable to kind of prevent things like this from happening.
And we'll have another update tomorrow. That'll be part of the show.
Oh, yep.
More medical witnesses are coming up tomorrow. Want to remind everybody, tonight is not an outlier for Wednesday. We are moving to a 3-day-a-week format, in part because our shows were dragging out hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, and we just felt like we were trying to cram too much into one show. And we're a little bit over again. We're really trying to keep it to an hour. But our last story is short, and I just want to say one more time, a little more pause for the cause, and then we're going to roll into our last story. And our next story takes us to the great city of Seattle. Something that SPOG President Mike Solon's talked about at his podcast, when he addressed realtors, the great exodus that is going out of the city, all of these people that are leaving, how the property values are crashing, despite the fact that no evidence supports that whatsoever. And there was a study that came out by the, let me find it here, 1 second, apartment list. They actually had a link. Seattle PI did the story. There was a link to the apartment list case study and all of the tools that they have there. My first thought was, and this is why I'm covering this, Jennifer, my first thought was, this is some marketing fluff piece, some company that, helps people find apartments. It was a really impressive, in-depth case study with tools and models, and you can click this and pick this city and that city and slice and dice. It was very, very impressive. And so this is what they came up. 18% of renters in Seattle were looking elsewhere for apartments this last quarter compared to the year before. See, 18% are leaving. The city's a crime-riddled cesspool, just like Fox News is telling me.
You're not the same. I'm an American. You're a sick asshole.
It's an increase of 4% from a year ago. The top 3 areas where Seattle renters are looking to move is Olympia, Los Angeles, that's right, California, and Phoenix. But there isn't a mass exodus going, because this same report also looked at where people are looking to come to Seattle. And 17% of renters who live in the metro area but don't live in Seattle are looking to move into the city. So you got 18% looking to move somewhere else, but you got 17% on the fringes looking to move in part because rents have depressed because of COVID, and they want to move in closer in anticipation of having to return to offices. I'm actually surprised by that, because I've been saying people aren't going to do it. I guess I'm wrong. I should stick to weather forecasts. But there's another group. Renters in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Portland, Oregon are also looking to move in Seattle. And when you add up the math, Jennifer, on the net difference of the plus and the minus, it all coming back, it's just what Andrew Grant Houston said. It's less than 1%. So it's about neutral. So there's no exodus out of the city.
What? People are wanting to leave the burning city behind, the burning crime-filled anarchist jurisdiction behind?
I know. I've seen on Fox News.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Crazy.
I didn't get a lot of, I know a lot of people got phone calls over the summer, and it's what's going on? I heard in the news, I saw pictures, and it's like, those were pictures of other cities that Fox News was attributing to Seattle. Yeah. That wasn't going on here. And we've now learned almost a year later that most of the, not all, but most of the fires, the major fires, the AutoZone fire and the 3rd Precinct fire in Minneapolis, were set by white nationalists who were just trying to stir the pot.
Big shocker there, right?
I know. Big shocker there indeed. Just as we have learned here in Seattle, when we look at the events on May 30th, only one individual who was sentenced, we reported on that individual was sentenced out of Edmonds, was the only person that was local. Everybody else was from out of the city or out of state and purposely went there to cause problems on that day. And they were in no way supportive of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, or associated with anything other than watching crap burn. What a shock. Oh, and they were all white. And then the only other person, Jennifer, that was even close was this guy out of Everett who turns out to be a gun-running gangbanger who is now on murder charges from murder, I believe, out of Renton.
Yeah. Crazy, those things those white men do and try to blame on everybody else.
Just as we're trying to see what's going on in the defense in Minneapolis. It was George Floyd's drug problem. It was the angry crowd problem. It was a lack of training problem. It was everybody else's problem. I'm wondering when they're going to blame Al-Qaeda or the Clintons.
It was Antifa. It was all Antifa. That's next.
Too much Fox News.
There was Antifa
anyway, go ahead.
I said there was Antifa plants in the crowd. That's why,
I haven't been called Prestifa in a long time. I guess it's kind of a hard label to slap on us a year later now with everything that is going on. So, Jennifer, great show tonight. Thank you so much for a fantastic interview with Andrew Grant Houston. It's always hard in local elections to learn about the local candidates. There was something I saw in the comments about Nikita Oliver. We will be interviewing they, them is their pronouns. We will be interviewing them. That interview will run on Wednesday of next week. So we have Elise Barrett tomorrow. We have Colleen Echohawk on Monday. We'll have Nikita Oliver on Wednesday. Big things happening.
Are we doing Malcontented Minutes tomorrow?
I think we are going to do Malcontented Minutes tomorrow, right? Because we're committed to doing them once a week, so people are like, oh, there's the Malcontent. So I think we can actually preview the whole show right now. We're going to have Elise Barrett talking about COVID. We'll have a Chauvin update. We'll do Malcontented Minutes, and I think that's our hour.
Yeah. Come back tomorrow night for your chance at democracy, because you can vote in the polls in Malcontented Minutes.
And no Sidney Powell protesting. And with that, malcontents, Jennifer, good night to you. I will see you tomorrow.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Malcontent News is a team of journalists, activists, and researchers with 3 key missions. A commitment to show an unfiltered view of the before, during, and after of key events, live, as it happens. To defend the First Amendment using our rights of a free press. And to amplify the voices of underrepresented individuals, including Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Our team is committed to seeking equality for all and holding those in power accountable. The easiest way to support Malcontent News is to bookmark our website at malcontentnews.com, like and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, and in the Google News app. To provide financial support, you can become a patron, make a one-time donation through Venmo, or link your Twitch account to your Amazon Prime account and use your free subscription to subscribe to Malcontent News. Thank you for supporting independent journalism and for being a malcontent.
You fit the profile. You're the malcontent.
Nobody wants to hear the nonsensical ravings of a loudmouth malcontent.
He said malcontent Antifa. Fuck you.
You are the biggest hypocrite on the face of the planet.
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say.